Hello everyone, welcome to another React tutorial. So in this video we are going to create this application, and in this application we are going to use the Hacker News API. So we are going to fetch articles from there, and this project is going to have pagination, as you can see, and it will also have a search bar here where we can search for any topics. So the link to the GitHub repository is going to be in the description section below, and the link to the API documentation is going to be there as well. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. So I am going to start by creating a new React project. I'm going to use the npx create app command, and this is basically going to generate a new project in here. This is going to take a couple of seconds, so I will be back when this is finished. So after creating the project, we will navigate into the project that was generated, and after that we will go ahead and install the dependencies we are going to need for this project. We will use the Axios library to make requests to the API, and we will also need the React Paginate library for the pagination. Alright, the first thing I did was to start the development server. I used the npm start command, and now the first thing I want to do is to get rid of everything we don't need. We're going to start here in app.js. For example, we don't need the logo. Also, we are using allow functions. And now I want to go ahead and import the news page. We are going to create that in a moment. In the app component, I am going to return that news page. I'm going to create that one. Newspage.js. And in here, I'm just going to create a normal component. I will also use arrow functions, and I'm gonna come here and export that component. For now, I just want to wrap everything in a div with a class name of container, and for now I just want to return a simple text that says Hacker News. I do want to create a folder for components. Now I want to head over to the news page file and import a bunch of stuff we are going to use. First, I'm going to import the use state and the use effect hooks from React. And I also want to import the Axios. We're going to use this one to make requests to the API. Now with the use state hook, we can go ahead and use state in our application. For now, we just need state for the articles, and it's going to take a default value of an empty array. We also want one more state for the loading state of our application. So when we are fetching data from the API, we can use this state to keep track of that, and this is going to be true by default. when we start, we will be fetching data from the API. And here for the use effect, here for the use effect, we will just provide the function, and this is going to be an allo function, and we'll also provide an array of dependencies. For now we are just using an empty array, so this function will only run when we load the application. So in here we are going to fetch data from the API. So the first thing we want to do is to make sure that this is loading state is set to true, and now we can go ahead and create a function that will fetch data from the API. This is going to be an asynchronous function. So, and at the end of below this function, we are going to call this function. So here inside this function, I want to wrap everything in the try and catch block. Also gonna use the finally block. Okay, so here after you have done everything, I wanna set the is loading state back to true. So here in the try, I'm gonna try to fetch data from the API, and since this is an asynchronous function, we can use the await keyword. So this is going to be a get request, and you are just going to fetch data from this URL, and by default will not provide a search keyword. This is just going to give us some posts, some articles. We are going to store the response in a variable. So here we can get the data from this response, and for now let's console log the data we are getting from the API. So let's go in the time. So let's go in the and in here, if we get errors, we can print them out here. So here back in the browser, let's inspect and see if the data is being console logged in here. And as you can see, we are getting data, and in here we have a bunch of stuff. We are getting hits, which are basically the articles, and we are also getting the number of pages and other bunch of information. So let's go back in the code editor. We don't need this anymore, can get rid of it. So from the data, we are going to get the hits, which are the articles, and also we are also going to get the number of pages. And with this data, we are going to update the state. We're gonna set the articles, and here we wanna need one more state for the number of pages or total pages. So let's go ahead and create that one, and by default this is going to be equal to 0. So after setting the article, after updating this article states, we can also update the total pages. So down here we can go ahead and display the articles. So we are going to have a new container for the articles. It's going to have a class name of news container. Okay, so we are going to display data according to the isLoading state. And if the application is loading data from the API, we are going to display a simple text. Otherwise, we are going to render the articles. Since this is an array, we can use the map function. And we are going to need a news card for the articles. We don't have this component for now, but don't worry, we will create that in a second. So for a list, we also need to provide the key, and every article from the data we are getting has something called object ID, so we can use this one as the ID. And we also need to pass the article here as prop to this component. Now let's go ahead and create this component for the news card. And let's go back here and import this component. So in this news card component, I just want to create a simple functional component. So I'm gonna use an arrow function here. This is going to take in props as arguments. Okay, from the props, we just need to get the articles, and down here we are going to export this news card component as the default export. And here in this news card component, I just want to return a div. It's gonna have a class name as well, and here inside this div container, I'm just going to I'm going to render the title of the article, and I also want to link to the original article. So here you can use the article.url. So this is an object, it basically have different data in it. And before we so I also want to make sure I have the title for the article. If I don't have the article, I'm just going to return nothing. So if the article we are getting does not have the title, we don't want to display anything. So let's try this one more time in the browser. and it's not, as you can see, it's not working as expected. So the problem is here in the news page. So when we finish loading data down here, we do not want to set the is loading to true. Instead, we want to set it to false. So if we go back in the browser, we'll see that it's displaying the articles as expected. Okay, so I do want to go ahead and start this application, and I am not so I am going to come here in the app.css. I'm gonna get rid of everything, and then I am just going to write the styles here. Now that we have applied styles to our application, it looks much better. You can get these styles from the GitHub repository. The link will be in the description section. Now that everything is working fine, it's time to implement pagination. First of, we're gonna have to import React Paginate from React Paginate. So I'm gonna come here below the news container. This is where I am going to put the pagination. The first prop is going to be the next label, which is basically the label for the next button. And the second one is going to be for the previous button label. Also gonna use something simple. And also for the break label. We also want to set the first page prop. This will allow us to update the current page. So this one is going to be the same as the current page. So we don't have the current page right now defined. So we can go ahead and define that one using the useState hook, current page, set current page, and by default this is going to be equal to 0. Also here for the props, we're going to have the page count. This is going to be the same as the total pages. pagination when we don't have any pages. And we're gonna have a function that will handle the change of the current page. So we don't have this function yet. We will create that in a second. Also the class name, which is going to be the class name of this pagination container. So now let's go ahead and create this function that will handle the change of the current page. This function is going to take in the event as the argument, and with this argument we can update the current page. This is going to be the event.selected, basically the current page. Now let's check how this looks in the browser, and as you can see we have the pagination. Now I do want to inspect this pagination, so in here in this handle page change function, I'm just gonna console log the event and see what we are getting. I'm going to inspect this. I'm gonna scroll all the way down and click on any number, so, and as you can see here we are getting the selected page. Before we style this pagination, we wanna give it a class name for some elements. For example, the active button will have a different class name so that we can style it, and also the previous button will have its class name. Also the next button. Now I'm gonna go ahead and start the pagination. Now that our application is looking much better, let's head over to the code editor and start implementing some stuff for the API. For now, when we make requests to the API, we are only getting suggested articles. Now we want to be able to fetch data according to the current page. So we're gonna use the params, and in here in the params we are going to provide the page. This is going to be the current page, so we're gonna fetch data according to the current page. So we're gonna add this current page to the dependencies. So we want to make sure we make request every time the current page changes. So we are going to make a request to the API every time the current page changes. Let's test this in the browser, and as you can see, when we click on these paginations, we are getting new articles just as expected. So now I want to add a search form to our application so we can search for the articles. So here we're going to define another state for the search query, and this by default it's going to be an empty string. We are also going to need one more state for the input value, since we are going to have an input tag in the search form. So we're gonna declare that one as well. And by default this is going to be an empty string. So I want to have the form right here after the title, before the articles. Just form tag with a class name of search form. So when we submit this form, we want to call this a function, which is the handle submit function. We will create that in a second. Form, we are going to have an input field. I'm going to have a placeholder, and for the value we are going to just use the search input. And when this input changes, we want to update the state. We want to set the search input, and so we just use an arrow function in here, and with this event we can update the search input state. And down here I want to have a button. This is going to be a submit button. Now let's go ahead and define this handle submit function. This is going to be an arrow function, and it will take in the event as the argument, and with this event we are going to prevent the page from reloading. So we're gonna call the event.prevent default, and here we are going to reset the current page, and we are also going to set the search query, and the search query is going to be the same as the search input. Now let's head over to the browser and see if this works. We refresh the page. So if I type for something like Python and search, so this is not working as expected. So let's head over to the code editor and see what we did wrong. Okay, we need to pass in this query into the dependency array here in the use effect hook. So when this query changes, we want to fetch the data. We want to call this function. So we also need to include this query in the param. So when we make a request, we can provide a search query. So let's try this out. I'm going to type something, and as you can see, when we submit the form, we are getting articles according to the search query. So now let's head over to the code editor Now I do want to style this form, so I'm gonna do that. So I noticed that I made a typing mistake in the news page. So for the button, I made a typing mistake. So we're gonna go ahead and fix that one, and then head over to the browser, and everything looks fine as expected. So we test this one more time. Alright guys, this is the end of the video. If you guys have any questions, let me know in the description section below. Otherwise, I will see you in the next one.